Good morning, Baltimore. It is Monday, June 8th, and thank you for tuning in to the latest episode of the Early Birds podcast. I'm your host, Matt Weyrich, alongside columnist Josh Tolentino. Josh, coming in here after a long day here in Toronto, or I say here, I'm actually now at the Dulles Airport, sitting in my car, as our YouTube viewers can see, after a crazy day that included a bizarre no call, and lots of controversy, some interesting quotes from umpires. And Josh, you were watching the whole thing from home. I'm sure it was quite the theatrics from there. How you doing, man?
Yeah, what a crazy, crazy sequence, and we'll surely get into that, very, very, very soon. But what an even wilder sequence. I'm encouraging all of the audio listeners on the pod to go over at Sun Early Birds on YouTube and just check out Matt's surroundings, man. I'm predicting that you're going to have pretty good acoustics for this show, which again involves a controversial call that we will discuss. But Matt, here at Early Birds, we bring it. Obviously, you and Jacob are at every single game away from the stadium. The three of us, we do our best to really cover this team from all angles while they're at home, which they now return here for an important stretch. But the road life, man, it is not easy. Like what you mentioned, you were up there in Toronto. I wanted to go into the show asking you about just how the weekend was, but how was today? Just obviously covering such a dramatic and sudden finish there in Toronto, and then like what time did you get to the airport? And obviously you're back home. That's the most important part. We're glad you're back safe. But how would you rate your how you went through the airport Olympics today?
Yeah, well, it's still going. Still got to make the drive back from Dulles here, so a little ways to go. We're recording here just before 11 o'clock, so yeah, it's been a day. I'd swear, there's just no such thing as a normal getaway day coming back from Toronto. Last year, when they faced the Blue Jays and I was there, was opening weekend, and Tomoyuki Sugano pitched in the final game, which there was a ton of Japanese media there, lots of attention. He gets hurt in that game. Plus, it was the day that just torpedo bats like blew up, and I hung after the game trying to talk to Adley Rutschman about his torpedo bat, and ended up having to change my flight because I didn't get to the airport in time and had to fly back super late. And actually flew to a different airport and had to catch a ride from another reporter back to Baltimore. So it was a whole thing. This time I made my flight, which was good. It was a sprint out of there. Wrote one of my stories off the game in the car. Got to the airport, was writing on the plane my morning story for today about Shane Baz. Give that a read on his curveball usage this year. It's been crazy, but I am glad to be here with you, Josh, on Early Birds. This is my home. This is my safe space. This is where I feel comfortable. So always got to make time to get a pod in. Even if it's not going to be a super long one today, but we did want to break down this series in Toronto, and most specifically this play. So Orioles dropped 2 of 3 against the Blue Jays after taking 2 of 3 from the Boston Red Sox. They had a chance to win this game here on Sunday, jumping out to a 4-0 lead. Shane Baz was absolutely cruising, outdueling Kevin Gausman through 5 innings, and then things really unraveled there in the 6th. And, Josh, let me just kind of walk through what happened here, play by play. But Ernie Clement is on first base here with 1 out in the 6th inning. Baz still on the mound. Had been cruising, as I said. There was just an error earlier in the inning from Gunnar Henderson. Here, I'm pulling up the game log to make sure I have it completely right. 6th inning. Clement reached on an error by Gunnar Henderson, so that right there would have been the second out had Gunnar been able to handle that ball cleanly. So keep that in mind here. But as now with him on first base, Brandon Valenzuela is up. He hits a ground ball that Gunnar Henderson fields going across second base. Now, obviously, Clement is coming down the baseline towards him. And as Gunnar fields the ball, he takes 2 steps, reaches his glove out with his hand, a quick reach towards Clement. As he is doing that, Clement veers out of the base path, getting around him. Gunnar then throws the ball to first base to get the out at first. However, Clement is ruled not to have run out of the base paths. And the reason for that ruling was that the MLB rulebook says that the base path is established once a tag is initiated. Henderson initiated the tag, and as he was, Clement was already starting to veer off of what is the traditional base path between first and second base. And so his established base path at that point was farther out. And so the umpire ruled that Gunnar did not kind of reach out for the tag in time. And that is how Clement was able to get to second base. Now, by the rule book, yes, that is exactly what it says. However, in the moment of the play, Henderson was moving across the base, moving towards Clement to make the tag. Doesn't make the motion maybe as early as he could have, but he was clearly going over to tag Clement, and Clement, seeing Henderson, was running out of the way. So you can argue kind of what initiates the tag at that point, but where Clement was by the time Henderson got to him, so very clearly out of the way of the baseline, and that out that does not happen ultimately comes back to haunt them. Would have been an inning double play. Instead, a run scores on the play because Jesus Sanchez was on third base there. And then back-to-back RBI hits from the Blue Jays ultimately lead to a 5-run inning. Only one of those runs was earned. And that knocks Boz out of the game. He doesn't get a quality start. And guys were pissed. There were tempers flaring. Gunnar Henderson, in the moment, raising up his arms, yelling at the umpire. We get Shane Boz as he walks off the mound saying, "You effed up," across as the Masson cameras caught. Craig Albernaz comes out and has a long conversation. And Albernaz also says that he was told in that moment that the tag, what he heard from the umpire, was that Henderson did not make a big enough tag to count. So he was actually getting two different, to count even as a tag attempt. So he was actually getting two different explanations, which didn't really make sense from the rule book. So a really convoluted situation here, Josh, but one ultimately that really cost the Orioles. And after the game, several players coming out saying that, they didn't feel like the correct call was made.
Yeah, man, a lot to take in there. And first, I have a quick follow-up for you. As Shane Boz is walking off the mound, what was the environment like at the stadium? Was it too loud? Obviously, and I know that press box has been moved, so I doubt like you could, actually hear. But you got the up close view, obviously speaking with him after. But I guess as Shane's walking off the mound, is he? What was the crowd like to get a full picture?
I mean, the crowd was getting pretty into it, especially with a couple of hits there. I think where it really started to escalate was actually when Albernaz came out to talk to, this was second base umpire Nick Lentz, by the way, talking to Lentz, and it got into a lengthy conversation. As the conversation continued to go on, the crowd was getting more and more agitated with how long Albernaz was staying out there. So that really brought up the energy levels from Rogers Center, and then they go and get the back-to-back hits right after that to drive in, the runs to mount the comeback. So that, I felt like, was what really kind of drove it from there.
Okay, so I got to preface this entire part of the conversation that I really we observe games of many different sports, and obviously there's always officiating involved. I hate pointing to officiating throughout the roller coaster emotions of a game. There's so many other variables as it pertains to a team's performance and how they can react to these unfortunate situations where human error is potentially involved. So again, but when it is that egregious, and that is the word that I used in my headline in my column discussing this exact moment, it's really inexcusable, Matt. And sure, like, can that technically explain their offerings? But why? I guess you look at why were there different things being said amongst the crew in question. You mentioned Lentz, if he were ever to visit Baltimore in the near future, and I don't think they, umpires have like a probable schedule like how they do with pitchers, but if umpires did have that, I'd imagine a few wanted posters, from this fan base, because
Jimmy's has already banned them. Jimmy's banned them from ever going to their restaurants.
I saw
so they
that.
post on Twitter.
I did see that. Yeah, so I mean, that's just one of many a growing list of establishments and folks in town. But again, just kind of getting back to that moment and that sequence, and you look at Shane Boz, and certainly he's an accomplished enough pitcher, and has the type of ceiling that Michael Elias believes in. That he obviously went out and traded a haul for him. He extended him here for a good time, but in the grand scheme of things, still a relatively young pitcher with upside, and not necessarily the most experience. He does have a little bit of postseason experience playing for Tampa, but his response kind of that is the outcome that you can control, and you got to imagine. I mean, that's just such a dramatic sequence, and that is weighing on your mind as you're on the mound trying to count the out that you should have been given before. It's like a ball don't lie type moment, to make a basketball reference. But again, I thought it was an egregious call. I thought the explanation and the theatrics with the umpires involved and in question made it even worse of a look, as some of the quotes filtered out that you can get into from this crew. But man, Nick Lentz, Blake, what are you doing? Like, I know you're playing a tough guy, and you're riding the home crowd and that wave of emotions, but spitting out your seeds on camera. And I know he doesn't know exactly when he's being broadcast and captured, but dude, you're there to do one job, and it's to get the calls right. And it's unfortunate, human error is involved, but just the way he kind of handled himself afterwards, didn't really have the guts to confront the people really involved on that play and sequence, and the one that it affects. Obviously, and this is one last thing that I put in my column. Hate playing the what if game, but could you imagine, Matt, if the Orioles get to the end of September and they're in 4th place and they're trailing the Toronto Blue Jays for that 3rd wild card spot? What is going to be on everyone's mind? Everyone involved covering this team, everyone cheering for this team. I think we're all going to look back to June 7th, 6-7, as the kids say, and we're going to point to this unfortunate sequence of. Again, there were other things involved, other variables. Rico Garcia, who's been lights out, he makes a mistake. Toronto rides the momentum, but what if they got that call right? I thought it was an egregious miscall.
Yeah, there were missed opportunities for the Orioles in this game, but ultimately, really all the air got sucked out of the balloon for Baltimore with this play. And, it was a frustrating moment for Boz. Henderson had just had the error. Had Henderson gotten the ground out on that first play, the double play wouldn't have even mattered. They would have only needed to get the one out at first, so that looms large. He's frustrated. He sees the call. He yells immediately to the umpire, and then again as he leaves. But you mentioned the quotes from the umpires after the game. Now, just to peel behind the curtain for how this works, when there's a play like this that happens in a game, the beats between the local beat, the home beat, and the away beat decide to send a pool reporter. And so we chose the AP reporter from Toronto, and he went in and asked a series of questions to both Lentz and crew chief Hunter Wendelstedt. And a couple of the quotes here. First, from Lentz: the runner has the right to establish his base path, and so Clement has established his base path to avoid the fielder from potential interference. Even though Henderson reached for a tag, Clement's base path was already established out there, going to second base, so therefore it was not out of the baseline. So that kind of explains what his thinking was, even though he says right there, even though Henderson reached out for a tag. According to Craig Albernas, that's not part of, that part was kind of a discrepancy then. Maybe they cleaned that up later after the game to make sure they were all, on the same page. But as far as the explanation that Albernas received on the field, he was told that Henderson did not make enough of an attempt at a tag, which is very different as to say, like, because when a tag is not attempted, a player can actually, by the book, run wherever they want. There is no baseline until a tag attempt is made. So technically, he could have been running into right field, and he wouldn't be called out for going out of the base pass until a fielder actually had the ball and tried to go for him. So that's one thing there. And then for Wendelstedt, and this was something. Quote, it actually is a very gentlemanly thing to do. He's talking about Clement. Quote, he was getting out of the way to allow the fielder to make the play towards first base. It just so happened that then they tried to spin it to get two, but Clement's base path was already established, and it was not trying to get out of that. So a gentlemanly
thing to do.
By Ernie Clement there, taking quite the stance. And this one, I don't think this quote was tweeted or anything, but also a part of the pool report here as I locate the email. Nope, not that one either. And this was a question I asked to be included here, but what could Henderson have done to make sure that the out was recorded? Lentz said, I'm not going to go into how to be a shortstop. And then Wendelstedt added, if either one of us could be shortstops, we'd be out there playing. So the whole nonchalant attitude
Wow.
just about
Yeah.
these whole situation. I mean, Orioles fans are already upset, and now to have these quotes drop, afterwards, it's kind of, I don't know. It just doesn't necessarily reflect an understanding of the moment here and in the stakes of which a win or loss was decided virtually on this call. So, at the end of the day, maybe by the rule book, it is correct, but in just watching your eyes on that play, like it's so very clear that Henderson is going over to make the tag, and you have Clement not veering over because he is making the play. He already had the ball by the time that Clement is moving out of the way. It's the outstretching of the arms, at which point apparently they are setting the base path. And if that's what you want to argue, okay, but just anyone who's watching that play in a backyard baseball, little league, whatever setting is going to be like, okay, he's out, onto first base. Like that to me was a little bit of are we really going right to the T by the rule book in a situation that maybe calls for a slightly different interpretation?
So I mentioned my frustrations, Matt, with the theatrics and some of the quotes that had emerged from that pool report. Up till now, I actually was unfamiliar with that exchange. And, I think back to all the times that I've been involved with trying to create questions for a pool report when a controversial call is in question. And, there were a few last year involving the Ravens and obviously, covering baseball, over half a decade now. I've seen some controversial things. And again, you explained the process of sending a pool reporter. I cannot recall when that you mentioned those last two answers there, where an umpire elicits a certain emotion or attitude or even a playful response. I mean, typically, like, they're the most buttoned up folks in terms of these subjects that we interview after the game. Obviously coaches, players involved, umpires, they keep it short and sweet. If they were in PR school, they breeze through it because of how buttoned up they are in their responses. So man, that makes me question again even that human involvement in all of this even more. And I will say this, Matt, I have not officiated any pro level sport. At the very surface level of things, Matt, I have officiated some rec basketball, some leagues that I've joined recreationally through church. And it is a tough spot to be in. So, to have the stakes at the highest that there is in this sport, I can imagine just how difficult that is to recall in real time. But you brought it up right there. Use your eyes, use common sense, and I think we all saw that again. I know Blue Jays fans are going to think otherwise, but just look at their manager. A quote we haven't mentioned yet from John Schneider. Ernie Clement may be fortunate there. I think the runner has 3 feet, and Ernie is good at disguising that sometimes, I guess. Maybe fortunate there. I think that tells you plenty.
Clement did say he thinks they made the right call. So of course, being on the
I
right
will say
side
it's
of it.
like a little. Yeah, I'll add it's a little comedic, and Gunnar probably doesn't think this, but it involves his Team USA mate who was involved in terms of the discussion of he wasn't the sole subject, but he was involved with that position group of those infielders on why Gunnar deserved more playing time in the WBC. And then here we are a few months later, both of those stars for their individual franchises involved in a very controversial play.
Yeah, and Henderson also, Boz came out and said, I'm not going to talk about that play because I don't want to get fined. Henderson was willing to call out the umpire here, and maybe he does get fined for this. But his quote, among the questions he was asked, I'm not going to chase him into right field when I'm trying to turn a double play there. He's only allotted so many feet to be considered in the baseline. And if you make a loop and slide to where you can't even reach second base in the next 2 steps, I don't really understand that. So yeah, that was a new one for me. But yeah, that was definitely, I felt like, not a great call. So Henderson making pretty plain his feelings on it. He was frustrated that he had recorded the error, and then the offense wasn't able to climb back into the game after that. So certainly not necessarily putting all the blame for that on that one play, but you can feel the frustration from his words there. And I've been an umpire at varying levels of amateur play. It's not easy. but at the same time, you got to have the baseball sense of awareness of the situation and where, what Henderson's trying to do. And if you actually roll back the tape, you can actually see that Lentz had his back turned to Clement when Henderson was fielding the ball, and then he turns right as Henderson and Clement are kind of meeting on the baseline. So he wasn't really watching that angle the entire play. So to make that call, it's something where you would have expected maybe all the umpires to come together and, okay, they changed the call because somebody else had a better vantage point and kind of saw what happened. I really expected that to happen, that one of the umpires to be like, okay, like you weren't looking that way. Like, no, it actually happened this way. And that just didn't happen. And then Craig Albanez comes out and argues, kind of expected him to get tossed there. It seemed like he didn't want to, just given how much was left in the game. And at that point, the Orioles were still winning and trying to protect the lead late in the game. So I can understand maybe not wanting to get tossed at that point. There was a play late in the game when Jackson Holliday ran out of the baseline and was called out for it. Very different play on that, and he was definitely out. But Albanez comes back out again and kind of gets in the umpire's face. Thought he was definitely going to get tossed in that situation. Doesn't get tossed there, even though it seemed like maybe he was trying a little bit harder to get tossed in that moment, being where the game was at that point. But man, it was quite the game. And quite the situation. Can't say I've ever seen anything like that before. But at the same time, it's baseball, man. You're going to see something new every time you go to the yard. And this was certainly one that I think is going to be stuck in the minds of fans between these two teams for a while.
You mentioned that call on Jackson Holliday, which again was probably the more of a textbook definition of that call. Dexter Kelly, the first base umpire, was the one who made that call on Jackson Holliday. He was probably the one who had the better vantage point, obviously of the base lane that is created at the point that Gunnar is initiating the tag from his vantage point. Again, looking from first towards second and the two players involved, because you point out, Lentz's POV in the moment by moment of that. So ultimately, Matt, I think this comes back down to how Boz handled himself and, looking more at the grand scheme of things. I think there's frustration, not just the Orioles, lost on Sunday. It's that they had a chance to turn this hot stretch, or not just turn it, but just continue it into a road series win. Obviously, they don't get that, and now they've got a sneaky, powerful team in the Seattle coming through. They've got a return series, when they go on the road that you and Jacob will be part of with Seattle, LA. But man, you just got to hope that this doesn't affect them in the way that the inning continued to unravel for the Orioles in the bigger picture of things here as they come home.
Yeah, certainly it leaves a sour taste in their mouths as they come back from this road trip. But ultimately, the Orioles did play fairly well. They go 3-3 on the trip against two division rivals, and I think some pretty emphatic victories in there. They had a chance to win this finale here on Sunday. But one thing I do want to talk about also from this game that I think bears having a conversation on: Samuel Basallo had an odd weekend, injury related. And on Friday is the designated hitter, has two at-bats, and in his second at-bat feels something in his side tighten up and ends up being pinch hit for. Trey Savage was on the mound. They pinch hit for him in his third at-bat, even though Savage was still pitching, which was immediately a warning sign right there. He's diagnosed with right abdominal discomfort. Does not start on Saturday, comes off the bench as a pinch hitter in the ninth inning, and then is back in the lineup Sunday, and maybe is not 100%. MRI came back clean, so he's not dealing with anything serious in that. But still seems to be dealing with a little bit of pain, and it seems like the expectation here is that, it's a 162-game season. Guys are nicked up all the time. If you can play and help your team, you should be playing. That is the expectation from the Orioles for Basallo. And later in the game on Sunday, he's involved in that same inning, in the sixth inning, right at the end of the inning, he's involved in a collision at home plate with Clement, mind you, who runs into him, and he's shaken up on the play. It looks like it is his arm that he kind of got run over a little bit, and he's down on the ground for a bit. Trainer comes out, has a conversation with him. He's down for a few minutes, gets up, and stays in the game. After the game, which that later in the game, Leo Taveras pinch hits for him in again a situation that is not a platoon matchup advantage. So it's very clear this is about injury or something. And Craig Albanaz is asked about that after the game, and here's his quote: "Not matchup based. Sammy is learning. He's learning a lot how to play through being nicked up when everything is checked out and everything is fine. So Sammy's learning to play through some adversity right now." That's sending a message from a skipper here who clearly wanted to see a little bit more toughness out of a young player in Basayo, who is 21 years old and still a rookie coming into his own in the league. Really just had his first great month as where he's starting to break out as a young force for the Orioles lineup. But clearly, from Albanaz's comments here, wants to see a little bit more from his player who hasn't gone on the injured list in the major leagues yet, but throughout his minor league career, you go back through a lot of things that he dealt with in the minor leagues. There were a lot of games that he was leaving early because of some minor injury or being scratched from the lineup because of some minor injury, and that has happened on multiple occasions so far this year.
Yeah, and I think that was a fair comment from the first year skipper. I think there were some people online who've criticized Craig Albanaz for going at basically one of his most successful players over the past month. You mentioned, in our last episode, the tear that he's on, the how he's forcing himself into potential AL Rookie of the Year conversation. But ultimately, he's still a rookie and is certainly learning on the fly. But this is the big leagues. This is, as Craig, I will say, as Craig Albanaz pointed that Samuel Basayo is still learning the ins and outs of the league and essentially demanding more assertiveness and aggression from his young catcher. At the same time, the Orioles are still learning his body, and that's a big body to be rumbling and tumbling there every single game, day in and day out. And Samuel Basayo, you're 21. You want to be able to navigate the ups and downs of a 162 grueling season, but ultimately, I think it's a two-way street there. They want more from Sammy to show that he's ready for these moments, and he certainly has been with his offensive production in recent weeks. I know he's cooled down over the past couple games, but I think it's a learning experience for everyone involved. It seems like anytime that, and you and I have said this before, but it seems anytime Basayo goes down, whether it be serious or apparently serious, or it could be, he stays in there and he's back in there. And I know he did stay in there. It wasn't necessarily the same as past times where it's, he's not laboring as much. I think he was clearly affected from that moment, which led to, probably played a factor in him getting pulled. But again, a learning experience for everyone involved.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, when you play catcher, you're going to be playing through some things, guys. They get hurt, more than anybody else, and I think look no further than Adley Rutschman for an example of a guy who's played through a lot over the last few years, reported or not. That maybe it has detracted from his offense at the plate at certain points, but that is kind of the expectation for a catcher in particular, but also for a guy who clearly the organization sees as a big part of its future and somebody that they want to build around. And Basayo, like I said, still a very young player in this game, a rookie, a long ways to go in terms of maturity. But at the end of the day, as you say, a learning experience for him, and one that the manager felt needed to be called out publicly. So we'll see kind of how he responds to that moving forward. Last thing here as we get going, Orioles now return home, facing the Seattle Mariners for 4 games and the San Diego Padres for 3. We will see about the status of Chris Bassett on Monday. His status is up in the air right now after he left his last start with a back injury. He threw a bullpen on, what day was that, Saturday, and was getting some opinions, Craig Albanaz said, so not sure what the extent of those are, but we will see if he goes on Monday. If it's not him, it will probably be Trey Gibson being called back up from AAA Norfolk. He is on the same rotation right now as Bassett, so would be on normal rest to start that game. As for the other starters, no surprises there the rest of the way. The Orioles are getting the brunt of the Seattle Mariners rotation. George Kirby, Brian Woo's in there, Logan Gilbert, and Emerson Hancock, who has been looking excellent as a young starter for them. So it's definitely not going to be an easy task for them. The Mariners have had their own ups and downs this year for sure, but the Orioles, who have been playing very well of late, with wins in 10 of their last 16 games now, return home where they have played very well throughout the entire season, a very good record at home, and we'll look to, as you said, get on a good run here before heading back to the West Coast for a 3-series road trip, one of the longer ones of the year. Josh, any final words for the good people?
Yeah, I'm gonna shout out Jacob, who put out a pretty good tweet just detailing this stretch that they're on. So they just finished up in Toronto, so they got the AL pennant winners, and now they get the AL runners up before they get them again in a few weeks. What a time for the Orioles! But hey, they had a strong end to May, still finished under 500, and they're going for their first winning month of the season. And again, it's just going to being able to come back home and reset. And that's Craig Albernaz's expertise, as we see it painted all over these walls. Final word for the good people. If you're enjoying the show, obviously you've made it through to this point, please follow us on all platforms. We're still trying to push up our following as we continue to build this thing. And you see Matt's dedication. Certainly don't question his work ethic as he records today's episode in his car at Dulles Airport. Made a safe trip home from Toronto. So go ahead and give us a follow, give us a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, podcast, wherever you're listening, and we would certainly appreciate it. Man, what a show. I'm looking forward to our next one as we dive into with Sam getting into Ravens mini camp, which is happening on Tuesday and Wednesday. So last few weeks have been voluntary. It's time to get all the boys back in town. We'll see. We'll definitely have attendance and just highlights for you guys on Wednesday, mixed in with the Mariners series as well.
Yeah, a lot to talk about there. We'll see some interior defensive linemen for the first time, perhaps. Maybe Nnamdi Madubuike sighting would be the first in a while. But always gives you a much better glimpse of what the team could look like when you get everybody on the field. So looking forward to having Sam there for that. And yeah, we'll see how this home series goes. He's Josh Tolentino. He said it all right there. So we're going to go ahead and get out of here so I can get home. Thank you all so much for listening, and have a good one.